Hello, everyone. It's Emil. It's Emil Guillermo. If you're watching our pre-recorded thing, sometimes, I do the recording and I say, I want to go on. Should I go on or just let the recording play? It's show 627. You can catch that on YouTube at Emil Amok 1 or wherever you're watching it on Twitter. If you're watching it on Twitter, at Emil Amok, X. Hey, welcome everyone. It's Emil Guillermo, Emil Amok to you. This is my version of the talk show, not the TikTok show, but a talk show in the traditional sense, except, you have one host who speaks and callers who are obedient and just listen. We don't, you can interact, you can wave your fist, or you can give a thumbs up or whatever on the opinions that I might have. But it really is a low pressure, low involvement kind of talk show. Interactive in the sense that you're listening, but we try to be more accommodating, where I do the talking, you do the listening. You can chime in on Facebook, I guess. You can put in a little chat. Anyway, this is my takes on all things considerable, the Takeout. The Emil Amok's Takeout. We were actually first before that actual other Takeout. We were doing it in a different format, different platform. And now we just do it here live because this is what broadcasters do. It's not a terrible thing. I got a note from a friend who works for a major media company, and he told me he was taking the buyout and he was leaving, he was retiring, and it saddened me because who are you going to edit? Who are you going to? He deserves the rest. He deserves. Just looking at his resume, it's like the greatest hits of journalism. A good friend of mine. You say, okay, what happened to you, Emil? Well, he's a good friend of mine. And I wish him well. He's gone on the job for a few more days, and when he leaves, I will officially embarrass him by telling him how much, how important he is in journalism, and what a valued friend he's been. Even though we have, it's like people you've known for 50 years. You're lucky that you see them every now and then. I didn't see him every day, but anyway, it was quite a thing when I found out, he's going to be going. A lot of my friends and contemporaries, as I was doing my thing in the media business, have gone on. And another reminder. So anyway, we do this thing here, Emil Amok's Takeout, my takes on all things considerable, because there's a lot of things out there that need to be talked about. I guess, are you talking about the Czech shootout today? It's sad what happened over there, because, news just sort of follows it like, massacre, at least 15 people killed. And that's a sad thing, but it's kind of like this global situation with guns, and it just piles on. Czechoslovakia, in Prague. The other big story, Rudy Giuliani has said he's going bankrupt. You knew that was going to happen. That he puts on a good face, like, hey, he's good. Hey, he's got backup. He's going to prove that he wasn't, that he did nothing wrong in that defamation case involving the two Georgia election workers, Lady Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. And every time he had an opportunity to testify, he didn't. Why? Because the court of public opinion is more important to him than the court of law. Because in the court of law, he loses. In the court of public opinion, he can still sway and twist people's arms and twist people's minds and get people to think that he is still America's mayor. He's still that Rudy Giuliani, but he is not that Rudy Giuliani anymore. So what more can you say about Rudy Giuliani going bankrupt? We'll see. He's going to try to avoid paying anybody anything, but he's got bills mounting. He's still living well. He's not indigent, but he's just keeping a couple steps ahead of the bill collector. And he'll have to appear before a judge, and the judge is going to say, look, you're going to have to pay these two women, Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. You're not going to get away with just getting by with pennies on the dollar. You are going to make, if you don't make these women whole, you're at least going to give them something to let them know that justice was served and that rule of law means something. So we'll, as with everything else, with Trump and the lies and Giuliani and his lies on behalf of Trump, we'll stand by. All right, I wanted to come on. I mean, if you wanted to see that show that I did, 627, talking about Trump's lies and immigration, that's what made me want to come on today, because there's so much being tied to immigration, being tied to that southern border. And it's not just, it's not just people from Mexico and Central America and South America coming along the southern border. It's also Africans and Asians. New York Times did a couple pieces just within the last 3 months showing that more people coming up from the southern border or through the southern border from China, from South Asia. So we've got Asian Americans coming there, and it made me just marvel at the fact how Asian Americans now, or Asians, how they continue to come to this country, and how they continue to be maligned. I mean, they're going to be caught in that Texas law, new Texas law that Governor Abbott passed, where people will look at suspicion at all people of color as potential undocumented. I heard someone catch themselves and say, well, they're not immigrants, they're migrants. They're immigrants if they come and they intend to stay, but there's no intention of them staying, so they're just migrants. I guess that's why the reporter caught herself and said, oh, I said immigrants, I meant they're migrants. Or maybe they're immigrants once they've come here. Anyway, I got in this mindset because, this was the major story. I mean, with the Ukrainian aid, it's tied to the southern border. With the topic that I talked about in 627, Donald Trump talking about the poisoning of our blood, American blood. What? Well, the mixing has gone on for a long time. I don't know what kind of purity you're looking for, Mr. Trump, but the mixing has gone on for a long time. And so I just went through my files, and it occurred to me that Joe Biden said something pretty interesting on Sunday. But first, before I get to that, he talked about the Chinese Exclusion Act. And I'll get to that in a second. But first, let me just tell you, this just came over on The Hill is reporting this. The Economist and the YouGov poll is out, and The Hill is reporting that young voters overwhelmingly say they would support President Biden over former President Trump in a hypothetical head-to-head matchup if the 2024 presidential election were held today, according to a poll released by The Economist and the YouGov folks, conducted via web-based interviews December 16th through 18th, so fairly recent. I mean, if you're going to call these polls a snapshot in time, they better be new snapshots. So this is relatively new. December 16th through 18th. more than half, 53% of registered voters under 30 said they would support Biden, and less than a quarter, 24%, said they would support Trump. That's pretty significant. 53% of young voters registered under 30 said they would support Biden, and less than a quarter, 24%, said they would support Trump. This is important. Why? Because we hear a lot about people saying, well, Trump's really gaining in all these toss-up states, and Biden is losing among minorities. He's losing among young people. Those are the hot demographics that we got to look for in terms of movement to see how the 2024 election is going to fare. And now the Economist YouGov poll says, hey, voters under 30, more than half, 53% of registered voters are going with Biden instead of Trump. Another 10% say they would support another candidate, and 4% said they were not sure, and 9% said they wouldn't vote. But still interesting that young voters are going for Biden, according to this Economist YouGov poll. On the web. Now, the other thing is it's on the web. So they're getting legitimate young voters, because what young voter is waiting for a telephone pollster to call? So when you look at polls and see how the information is ascertained, if they say a phone poll, they're not going to get really good young voters. If it's the web, they're going to get, young voters, because they're probably using cell phones, right? Among registered voters 30 to 44 years old, Biden still leads, but by a slimmer margin, 49% Biden, 38% Trump. Still, that's huge. That's a big margin. And this is just an age demographic. It's not, party or anything. The trend reverses for older age brackets among registered voters 45 to 64. Ooh, those old people. 39% support Biden, 47% support Trump. And among registered voters 65 and over the old guys, 36% support Biden and 53% support Trump. Oh my goodness. You fellow oldsters, I gotta disabuse you of your opinions. But like I said, this is purely demographic, not it's purely by age, not by party. Still, the significance is young people have not abandoned Joe Biden. That is the message from that new poll, which was taken December 16th through 18th by the Economist YouGov folks. All right. So I mentioned that about Biden because Biden actually has been doing a lot of things that are very, this show has a slight Asian American tilt. I'm being Filipino American, and our subtitle of our show, besides being Emil Amok's Takeout, is WDAAT. What does an Asian American think? Because they never ask us. By the way, I don't know what the race was at the breakdown of the young voters there. That report or that survey was reported on The Hill, thehill.com. But I noticed this over the weekend because Sunday, if you didn't notice, did anyone mention Rock Springs or Hell's Canyon? Anyone mention that to you? It's not the anniversary of those two events, but the significance of this past Sunday was it was the 80th anniversary of the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Now, I I want to mention this because if you don't know the Chinese Exclusion Act, well, we ought to know this. This is the 80th anniversary of the repeal of the act. And if no one has mentioned it to you, last Sunday was the anniversary. If no one has mentioned it to you, of course, who did mention it? Who put out a statement about the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act? President Joe Biden. And it's not just because he's got a crackerjack staff of Asian Americans on his White House initiative. It's because he cares. Joe Biden has cared about Asian Americans from day one when he took over from the orange guy. I mean, I just think that Joe Biden has been consistent. And so when I saw this in my inbox, statement from Joe Biden, President Joe Biden, on the 80th anniversary of the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act, I said, of course he would have a comment on this. And thank goodness, because no one else, I didn't hear anyone else mention the Chinese Exclusion Act or the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act. And this is what Joe Biden said. Our nation was founded on the fundamental idea that we are created equal and deserve to be treated equally. But for 61 years, the Chinese Exclusion Act failed to live up to that promise. It weaponized our immigration system to discriminate against an entire ethnic group, first time, and was followed by further discrimination against many in Europe and all of Asia. The act, the Chinese Exclusion Act, along with racism and xenophobia in other parts of American life, was part of the anti-Chinese driving out era, which included the Rock Springs and Hell's Canyon massacres. I'll get to them in a second. In 1943, the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed, and it was followed by laws that led to an immigration system that better reflected our values as a nation of immigrants. So we're celebrating that 80th anniversary, 1943, of the repeal of the Exclusion Act. But here's the thing, you do a little digging. They got rid of the Exclusion Act, which meant that you could come to America, but you had to be certified, you had to have certificates. I mean, it's still pretty nasty, and there are still quotas. They went to quotas. So, the United States wasn't great in 1941, ultimately when they finally repealed the Exclusion Act, or 43 when they repealed the Exclusion Act. It was during World War II. They still had the quotas, and they didn't get rid of the quotas until 1965. So we were still in a kind of purgatory. All right, the first part of that graph that I read, he said the anti-Chinese driving out era, which included the Rock Springs and the Hell's Canyon massacres. Boy, if you don't know about Rock Springs or Hell's Canyon, you ought to. You ought to just take a second and, you can take it from me. I'll read you a little about Rock Springs. Rock Springs was first, and then we can talk about Hell's Canyon. Rock Springs was a labor dispute between white and Chinese coal miners on September 2nd, 1885. And it turned into a massacre, the Rock Springs massacre, that left 28 Chinese miners dead and 15 others wounded. I mean, you think it's bad now with the way people are shooting and killing each other now in the 21st century. I mean, now it's kind of indiscriminate. You can get mass gun violence anywhere. Prague today, Uvalde, Parkland, and anywhere in America. In 1885, the bloodbaths were all aimed specifically during this anti-Chinese drive It was aimed at Chinese here in America. 28 Chinese miners dead, 15 others wounded, September 2nd, 1885. Following the violence, the white miners set 79 homes ablaze, wiping out Chinatown in Rock Springs, which was then the Wyoming Territory. Can you imagine that? Perpetrators of the violence against the Chinese immigrant community faced little to no consequences for the massacre. An anti-immigrant and anti-Chinese sentiment followed the Chinese immigrant community as they moved from the American West to other parts of the country. And of course, this is how we got the Chinese Exclusion Act, because this first major wave of Chinese immigrants, they came here to mine gold, to build the Transcontinental Railroad. And then they worked the gold mines, the American West. But as, economic situations go up and down, and as competition over jobs became more fierce, prejudice, violence against Chinese laborers increased, especially since they were willing to work for lower wages. And of course, the cry was, the Chinese immigrants take jobs away from white men. But this is how we got the Rock Springs Massacre, September 2nd, 1885, 28 Chinese miners dead, 15 others wounded. Following the violence, the white miners went after the homes of the Chinese miners, 79 homes set ablaze, wiping out the Chinatown and Rock Springs. So that's Rock Springs. The other thing that Joe Biden mentioned was Hell's Canyon, the Hell's Canyon Massacre, also known as the Snake River Massacre, also known as the Chinese Massacre at Deep Creek. And it happened 2 years later, in late May 1887, in Oregon, Northeast Oregon. 30 Chinese laborers were mining gold in an isolated part of Northeast Oregon. The entire group was gunned down by a white gang of horse thieves. Hell's Canyon Massacre, or the Snake River Massacre, more recently known as the Chinese Massacre at Deep Creek, is considered one of the deadliest attacks against Chinese Americans in U.S. history. Now, I'm impressed that Joe Biden mentions on the 80th anniversary of the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act, he mentions Rock Springs, and he mentions Hell's Canyon. You ask any Chinese American, hey, tell me about Rock Springs. Oh, I don't know. I was on a Greyhound bus and I passed in Wyoming. Yeah, but did you know about the massacre? The massacre? I don't know anything about the massacre. You ask anyone about Hell's Canyon, they know about the massacre? The massacre, Hell's Canyon Massacre. Well, get this. Like previous acts of violence against Asian immigrants at the end of the 19th century, the identity of the 7 murderers was known, but none were convicted or punished. Yeah. So, no wonder it's been covered up. No wonder it's been hidden. No wonder no one knows about it, because we aren't taught about it in history. But when the President of the United States mentions the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act, and he talks specifically about Rock Springs and Hell's Canyon and the massacres there in the 19th century, Google it. Pay attention. It's our history. It's Asian American history. Because if you think that Stop AAPI hate was just a pandemic thing. If you think that all the transgressions that Asian Americans have felt since the civil rights era are kind of like new things, 20th century, go back to the 19th century, go back to Hell's Canyon, go back to Rock Springs. In fact, when it comes to Hell's Canyon, even though they knew the murderers, they were never convicted or punished. And it was forgotten until 1995 when a clerk in Oregon, Wallowa County, discovered details about the massacres. And then he found the files locked away in a safe. They didn't know it was there. And then they found it. And then a reporter who was with the Oregonian at the time did a big piece and just unveiled the story. But it's not as if there wasn't coverage at the time, but there was a cover-up. And according to history.com, this was near Lewiston, Oregon. And there was an attempt. This was reported in the Lebanon Express, 1887. Quote, opinion is divided as to the authorship of the blood deed, but the whites, the reds, and the yellows are suspected. More than likely, it was the whites who looked with an evil eye upon Chinese intrusion in American mines. The newspaper read, the American miner kicks hard at the Chinese miner. And then some media coverage tried to cast blame on other Chinese immigrants, including an 1887 article in the San Bernardino Daily Courier that claimed the public, quote, had every reason to believe the miners had been murdered by their own countrymen, not by whites or Indians, as was at first supposed. So, this was talked about, certainly, at the time. And then when they found out it was these horse thieves, they knew the identities, and then they very quietly hid the files. And what they did was they just forgot about the history. A local rancher who attended the trial, there was a trial. That's how they know the identities of these men. They said, I guess if they had killed 31 white men, something would have been done about it, but none of the jury knew the Chinamen or cared much about it, so they turned the men loose. None of the men were ever punished for the crimes. And it wasn't until they found the records in Wallowa County, and a enterprising reporter for the Oregonian, Gregory Noakes, did more research on this, put out a nonfiction book in 2009, and that's how it became more widely known. But frankly, I knew in general about massacres occurring, but the Hell's Canyon massacre, until Joe Biden mentioned it in his Sunday statement, talking about the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act, I knew there was violence against Asians in Oregon, against Asians in the mines, but I did not know about this. Same with Rock Springs. And so now you know. I mean, it's funny. I mean, this is just our history. This is Asian American history. And now you understand why there is a movement for people to try to forget or to uncover forgotten history, but just make sure that all that is forgotten forever, because I guess people would say, well, what good does it do for us to know this? What good does it do for us to understand the animus and the hate toward Asians? Because they want to think, oh, well, this is a new thing. We hate it because now we hate Asians because of the virus, because they're taking our tech jobs, or for whatever reason. There's a new 21st century rationale for hate toward Asian Americans. And, people don't want to know, there's a legacy of this happening. People don't want to understand or realize that this has been going on since the 19th century, since the Chinese Exclusion Act. And I'll be writing more about this in my LDEF blog, because, the gift of history is the gift that should keep giving, because if it keeps giving, then we have an understanding, we have knowledge, we go beyond our ignorance, which is a gift, right? It's a gift to go beyond our ignorance. But some people would rather stay ignorant, like Ron DeSantis and, all the anti-woke people. They don't want to be woke. They want to go through life saying Rock Springs, Hell's Canyon. Hell's Canyon? What is Hell's Canyon, Emil? Thank goodness it was Joe Biden who brought it up. Joe Biden, on Sunday when the statement was released, just being reflective of the 80th anniversary of the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act. I read the rest of his statement because it's pertinent, because as you hear people talk about immigrants and what they're doing to immigrants or people coming through the southern border, how they want to crack down on these people, you hear about what Texas is doing to make it more difficult to send people away. And you got to know that a lot of those people are Asian. They're from all over the world. They're not just coming from Mexico or Venezuela. Some are coming from China. Some are coming from India. This is the 21st century immigration problem. America has always been bad on this. And we're at a new level of bad now. But like I said, if you understand the Chinese Exclusion Act, you'll say, wow, we were pretty bad in the 19th century. It's not just a new thing. We were pretty bad in the 19th century. So this is what Biden said. He released in a statement. On this anniversary of the Chinese Exclusion Act, the repeal of the act, we remember those whose lives, families, and communities were irreparably harmed. We remember the brave and diverse voices, from Frederick Douglass to Blanche Bruce to Pearl Buck to the American Jewish Committee and so many others, a very diverse sentence there, who spoke up in solidarity against the act and demanded a fairer and more just immigration system. And we recognize that despite the progress we have made, hate never goes away. It only hides. Today, there are those who still demonize immigrants and fan the flames of intolerance. It's wrong. I ran for president to restore the soul of America, to bring people together and make sure we give hate no safe harbor, to celebrate the diversity that is our country's strength. Words of Joe Biden in his statement, December 17th, 2023. You may have missed it because we were covering Rudy Giuliani's bankruptcy. We should be covering the GOP's bankruptcy. Bankrupt in terms of their immigration policy. For generations, this is more Biden, last graph. For generations, people of Chinese heritage have enriched our country, from Chinese laborers who did backbreaking work to build the Transcontinental Railroad in the 1800s, to the Chinese Americans who serve in our military, to the authors, artists, scientists, entrepreneurs, and scholars of today. We honor them and all immigrants who continue to make extraordinary contributions to our nation. That's what Joe Biden said on Sunday when he spoke of the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act. And what did we hear over the weekend from his Republican counterpart, Donald Trump? Oh, that immigrants poison the blood of America, bringing back the hate of the 19th century toward Asians, bringing it back 2023. Pay attention. You want to know why young people in this Economist YouGov poll that I read at the top of the show, why young people are saying, yeah, we support Biden. Just look at immigration policy. Look at the stupid immigration policy that the GOP is trying to push. This is why the Economist YouGov poll just released. I'm seeing it on thehill.com. Web-based interviews December 16th through 18th, more than half, 53% of registered voters under 30 said they would support Biden, and less than a quarter, 24%, said they would support Trump. It's significant because you're hearing a lot in the other mainstream polls saying the young have abandoned Biden. They haven't abandoned Biden. They see that in a two-horse race, Biden will put out a statement like he did condemning the Chinese Exclusion Act on the anniversary of its repeal. He'll come out with that statement on Sunday. Meanwhile, Trump talks about the poisoning of America's blood in reference to immigrants. That's not where America needs to go. That's not where young people want to go. They don't want to vote for Trump. That's why this Economist YouGov poll says, hey, young people, voters under 30, they know who's the leader for their future. All right, so that's it for today. I mean, I just had to get that off my chest because if I let another day go without mentioning that Biden he's the only public figure this week who has mentioned the Chinese Exclusion Act or the repeal, the 80th anniversary of the repeal, and it's a big deal. If you're Asian American and you're here because your parents got here or your grandparents, or in the case of the Chinese, sometimes it's 4 or 5 generations. Significant. What would Donald Trump say? He'd say, hey, thanks for poisoning our blood. Go home. That's what Trump would say. Joe Biden says, welcome, we honor you. Asian Americans, Chinese Americans. What a pity they had this Chinese Exclusion Act, but we got rid of it. I'll have more to say about this in my column on the ALDEF blog, aaldef.org/blog, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. All right, that's it for our show. Hey, we do this Monday through Friday. Sometimes we're recorded. Sometimes we pop in, like to come up around 2 p.m. Pacific because it's like 5 o'clock Eastern, and usually the things that have happened. Maybe there's going to be some surprise that I'm missing out on, but I like to come on at 2 o'clock Pacific and talk about the things that have bothered me, talk about the things that are on my mind. This is a old-fashioned talk show. You got a guy like myself, journalist, talking about the news, reported opinion. I know a lot of people say, journalists are just... Well, there are a lot of talk show hosts who like to think they're journalists. They're not journalists. They're opinion givers. And, some haven't put on put in a decent day of work as a journalist. I have worked my career as a journalist, but I enjoy doing talk radio, or my version of talk radio. Like I said, there's all sorts of talk radio now. There's just audio now, right? But this is the way it's done on the web. Although that's why I call it my secret talk show, because a lot of people say, "Oh, just go on TikTok, go on." You can find this on YouTube at Amok1. Find it on Twitter, or what was formerly known as Twitter, now known as X, at Emil Amok, EMILAMOK. Also on Facebook, fb.com/EmilGuillermo.media. Thank you for listening. Back again tomorrow. I think we'll have Professor Dan. Usually get Professor Dan come on, talk about things, talk about the news. I guess we'll talk about Giuliani. That's kind of the big story today. And then we'll talk about, I guess, do we talk about happy holidays? I think. I get in the mood for Christmas, for the holidays. You know, one of the things we do on this program, we also meditate. It's important to meditate. It's become like a mainstream thing. I remember going to college, and my roommate was a meditator, and I thought he was crazy. Now here I am. I'm a meditator. I mean, I didn't think he was crazy. I just thought, oh, I got it. They put the Californians together because they think we're all meditators. Well, he was a meditator. I wasn't. And now I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I didn't meditate with him. I haven't seen him in 50 years. But I meditate now. And we like the loving kindness meditation. You know, where, you know, it's a form of self-love, self-compassion. Take care of yourself, and then you spread it out to others. It's sort of like, you know, when you put on the mask in the airplane, you know, you put the mask on first, and then you help the others, as opposed to helping the others first, and then you die helping them. And then, you know, then your kid's saying, what are you doing with this party hat? You put it on first, and then you help. So self-love, because if you show love and compassion to yourself, then you spread it to others, and it boomerangs. It comes back. And so, as I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Emil Guillermo here. Till next time.